Where's my paper? Okay, look at that. Marty's got his cheat sheet. Nice. Okay. I'm gonna trick you this time because I'll speak about something that doesn't mention here.
Oh, no, I see.
That's what I'll do.
There's something sentence about
When something is said, the prayer that something has already happened, even if you doesn't know about, is
Yeah.
not a proper prayer.
Oh, okay. I know what you mean. Yes, that is correct. We're actually referring to one specific prayer that I found that really could do the unthinkable, unimaginable, unchangeable. And this is the prayer of Hannah, the mother of Samuel. And then this is read on Rosh Hashanah. Oh, there's more people coming. I'm gonna have to go there. I'll have to go there anyways. Yeah. Okay. I'll put this here, and I'll connect the what's it called?
So it's the parasha, okay? But the class will be about the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah, it has to do. The context is the month of Elul, and then the time of the year is more meaningful. I would say more meaningful, but the time of the year is what I chose to focus this time over.
That Rosh Hashanah is a proper time for Hashem to make manifest that there is such a thing as merit and people can get rewarded for merit. And sometimes thought, well, maybe Hannah deserved the birth of Samuel.
She surely deserved it if she had it.
No, not simply that. That Hashem delivered or something in some sense Hashem owed.
Oh.
That she, her merit already deserved that birth.
Oh, okay. I
And
hear.
you're going too far with that case.
I can relate to that when we talk about.
It's a concept that makes Christians diverse.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, Christians don't believe in principle in merit, but usually for most purposes, maybe not for this one, believe that no human being can accumulate enough merit.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
That's the difference. Where perhaps they should that connection.
Yeah. Right. The trail. The trail is clear. With yeah. I mean, I think I don't know whether a serious research was conducted over the sources of everything in Christianity. I don't think they themselves could relate everything they do its source. So it's hard for us to decipher. Yeah. Right. So this group of students that went into the Lubavitcher Rebbe's room for a private audience. It's been decades now that Chabad rabbis on campuses in the United States are organizing this type of Shabbaton, which people come to Crown Heights in Brooklyn for a Shabbat, and they attend there. They could see other fellow students from across the country and sometimes even internationally, and they a few of them were actually privileged to get into the Rebbe for a private audience, and they asked questions. And the last question that was asked in the room was, "Do you really make miracles? We heard all these stories about you. Do you really make miracles?" And the Rebbe, instead of answering yes or no to that question, said, "It's not only I who make miracles, you could also make miracles." How is it so? He said, if for someone to pray seriously about a matter and have devotion and intention, and you could see that your prayer could make an effect in the world, and some people relate to that as a miracle, because not all means are natural. And it happens very often that people are in a need of a miracle. We all are having different lifetimes, different issues, not necessarily maybe complicated or very difficult issues, but even minor issues. I mean, who would not, close his eyes sometimes and dream they won the lottery just to take care of all the financial hurdles that people have to go through? I know I do that quite. There was a period of time where someone who lives here, like me, used to come here for Shabbat, and for the lack of means, instead of paying for his food, he felt that it was improper not to pay, but he couldn't afford. So what he do is he would buy every week the most simple lottery raffle for, I don't know, 30 NT or 20 something NT, and then he would put it into the tzedakah box, into the charity box at the entrance. I was surprised to find, every week a little note, and he said, "Well, I can't afford paying, but I'm buying you a ticket. If you win a few millions, maybe that would cover for my dinner." So, an interesting idea, an interesting thought somebody had in mind. And the Baal Shem Tov discusses this idea where really we can make miracles, we can make wonders. And he says that a person who feels that they are not entitled, not worthy, actually comes not from a positive side. And let's look at a quote from Keter Shem Tov. A person might suffer from exaggerated humility. This humility could result in distancing oneself from godly service. This person does not believe that his prayer is indeed effective and his Torah study draws heavenly abundance in all the worlds. Had he or she known, they would serve God with ultimate joy and vigilance. The Baal Shem Tov says, very simply put, we have the ability to change things. We are capable of doing things. We just don't know it and we don't believe ourselves. There's a lot of things we were talking about earlier about heresy, lack of faith in God. Baal Shem Tov says, yes, we believe in God, but we also should believe in ourselves for being able to do something in this world. And in fact, when a person thinks that they are not capable, oh, what am I capable of? Baal Shem Tov says, that's exaggerated humility. Don't say, what am I capable of? If God had put for you an opportunity, that means you are capable of doing things. It might not look like the situation is going to end in the same way you want it to end, but still, nevertheless, you still have the ability to pray, to learn Torah, to draw godliness into the world, and that, of course, is a very effective thing. In order to give a little more background on what really is the ability of every individual, let's look at a very interesting part of the ethics of our fathers. As you know, many communities are reciting the 6 chapters, Ethics of Our Fathers, and they are recited between Passover and Shavuot. Remember that period around May time, June time. This is when, but we Hasidim are taking this custom and are continuing it. So throughout the summer until Rosh Hashanah, so from Pesach until Rosh Hashanah, from Passover until Jewish New Year, we continue saying Pirkei Avot. So the 3rd chapter of Pirkei Avot says something very interesting, and he says like this: Akavia, the son of Malala, would say, reflect upon 3 things and you will not come to the hands of transgression. Know from where you came, where are you going, and before whom you are destined to give a judgment and accounting. I put a stress on these words, and for soon you'll see why. Anyway, very, very famous Mishnah. A person should know this is about fighting arrogance, fighting pride, putting a person in the place they need to be. Where did you come from? We all came from a drop of semen that meant egg, right? This is where we came from. Where are we going? At the end, we don't have to talk about. There's cemeteries. Cemeteries are filled with very rich people and very poor people. They end up at the very same place, right? A few inches on a few inches. Depends on the culture and depends on the place. That's where everybody's going for. And the last thing he says, before whom you are destined to give judgment and accounting. And look at the order of things. First judgment and then accounting. Apparently, this is exactly the opposite. First, you do accounting, and then you get judgment, right? A person is accounted for what they did or did not do, the good things or the negative things, and then, therefore, the judgment, right? The judgment follows the accounting. When you say judgment and accounting, that reminds people on the Soviet times in Russia, where people were judged apparently, but the verdict was already given before the court was even summoned, right? These are the people, the Contrrevoluzione, the people who are fighting the revolutionary, and the people who are, preaching for religion and so on and so forth, were judged. Indeed, there was a court, but the verdict was given before the judgment, before the court case was even commencing, because this was all one show. What is it called? A show off, a presentation, a play, a show. But this is, of course, not the case. Now, look at a very interesting quote. I don't normally quote from Likutei Moharan. Likutei Moharan is the one of the two works of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. Rabbi Nachman of Breslev was a grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, and he wrote a magnificent piece on the whole Torah called Likutei Moharan, which literally means as a collection of his words, a collection of his speeches. Now, this book is quite difficult to comprehend. Many people quote from it. Different parts of it are easier to comprehend, but sometimes the context is very, very difficult to try and get from it. So I don't normally quote from it, but look at this. Okay, we'll talk about the Likutei Moharan. First, we'll talk about remember who had the story of judgment and accounting.
That's in Book of Samuel.
Yeah, the book of Samuel. You know the story. I'll tell Marty the story, and whoever is listening from their home. There was a story with King David. King David, he saw the lady bathing, lady named Bathsheba. Bathsheba was married to a person named Uriah. And here there's a version that is a bit convoluted. I'll tell you the simple version. David desired greatly the woman of this man because she was beautiful and attractive and so on. And she was, by the way, the mother of King Solomon to continue. He was David's, of course, successor. And he summoned Uriah, her husband, and he actually appointed him to go on to the war to fight. And unfortunately, it was a war he did not come back from. And then after he did not come back from, she was left widowed. In fact, she wasn't a widow, she was divorced, because whoever went to fight in those days had to give a divorce to his wife, because in many cases they wouldn't find them, right? It's not like they know the person is dead. They don't know where the person is. They might be alive. So in order to prevent a situation where the woman is called aguna, I don't know the term in English for that, where the woman is not certain whether her husband is still alive or not, then she's bonded in the relationship. She's not allowed to marry because she's officially still married. So prior to going to war, every person that was in David's army, specifically those who were the actual fighters, the actual warriors, would give a consent, would give a divorce to their spouse, to their wives, prior to entering the battle. Anyway, he went to battle, and he never came back from the battle. King David took Bathsheba, the girl, the lady, and married her. And of course, King Solomon came from them. What King David did, and here there's a big...
Not the first time.
What?
Was not the first.
No, he had Absalom. He had a few other children, of course.
No, I mean, was not the first issue of David and Bathsheba.
Was not the first issue. Was the main thing, the main part of the story. The main part of the story. Anyway, King David, and then there's a whole argument in the Talmud of what exactly happened there. Could we say King David made a sin, or did he do something that might not be a sin, but might not also be the most proper thing to do? Then again, for a person in the level of King David, is not like me and you, ordinary people. If you do something that is a little, bending the rules or a little looking the other way, it's not the end of the world. But for someone at that status, at that level, like the king of Israel, who was appointed by God, this is a big deal. Any minor thing is drawn as a very big thing. And Nathan, who was the prophet in those days, had entered King David's chamber and told him a story. He told him a story about a king. And the king said he summoned a poor man to the palace. And he said, would you want to have dinner with me or lunch with me? And the poor man, of course, agreed. And he said, what do you have? The poor man replied, I only have one sheep. That's my whole property is one sheep. And he said the king had called for the people, his servants, to bring the sheep of the poor man. They had slaughtered the sheep and they had ate it as lunch together. And 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 of course this was a parable, this was an analogy, the whole thing, right? The poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought, right? That was everything he possessed in the world. And the king, of course, has herds and herds of goats and sheep and cows. He can have beef and he can have turkey and chicken and everything that the royal kitchen could prepare. Nevertheless, they were sitting for lunch, and what did they eat? The poor man's sheep. So he's telling him, Nathan is telling King David about the story, and he says, what do you think? He says, what do I think? How dare this king do that? How could he do that? How could he take everything the poor man has and just waste it for one lunch between them? How could he do that? And after he gave him the accounting, after he gave him the judgment, then is what Nathan said. Nathan said, it is in fact you. You were the one who took that lady, and that lady was everything that he had, the person who died at the war. His name was Uriah. And it says, you could have married any woman you wanted, yet you chose to marry this woman. And that was on the expense of someone else. Just like the poor man who his sheep was slaughtered just to have lunch, just to satisfy the king at one dinner. Um,
Probably at that time, they had already married 17 wives.
he had, was it 17? No, was it
He had a total of 18 during his
18?
lifetime.
Okay, some were married with ketubah and some were not married with ketubah. Yeah, that was yeah. I don't know what the order of
Il Bachelor was one of the last.
yeah, but I don't know if they had everything already lined up prior to that. So here is what the intention of accounting, of judgment and accounting. In fact, first he gave the judgment. He says the verdict, this person is at fault. And then the accounting was revealed that indeed he was the one that was put on the hook to find what is the verdict for him. And here's what the Kutei Mohan. It's a little small. I'll read it for you. Retribution is exacted from a person with his knowledge and without his knowledge. That's from Avot. For I heard in the name of Baal Shem Tov, this was his grandfather. Before any decrees passed against the world, God forbid, the whole world is gathered and asked if they concur with that judgment. Or the person himself against whom judgment has been decreed, God forbid. Even he is asked whether he concurs, and thus the judgment is concluded. The point is as follows. Surely, if he were specifically asked about himself, he would certainly protest and say that the judgment is not so. Right? If you ask about a person's own behavior, they would always find reasons and justifications. Yeah, but it's not exactly the way you want it to be, and it's not what you described. Things were different. You weren't there. You don't know what you're talking about. But once you tell a person about a third party, they would give you the judgment right away. Oh my goodness, how could he do that? Such an awful person, and so on and so forth. However, he is misled. He is asked about a case similar to his own, and he passes judgment. In this way, the judgment is concluded. This is similar to what we find in connection to King David of blessed memory when the prophet Nathan came to him and told him the story of the guest. David answered and said, as God lives, and as for the lamb, then judgment was passed against David, precisely as he had dictated. This is the meaning of retribution is exacted from a person with his da'at, meaning with his knowledge. This is to say, they ask him his da'at, his opinion, and even so it is without his da'at, for he knows not that the judgment is about him. And then Rabbi Nachman of Breslev gets to a conclusion. One has to take great care in this, not to pass judgment until one has considered a second and third time, for such judgment is life-threatening. How easy is it for us to respond to different things we read in the paper, we hear about, and we already determine if the person is guilty and what do they deserve to be punished with, and everybody does that all the time. Rabbi Nachman of Breslev says, your words are powerful. If you say something negative about someone else, that actually might be a situation where God is listening, and in fact the same case is actually my case. I'm the one judging someone, but in fact the judgment is given before the accounting. which is, we said, not the order of things. First, you put everything on the scale, right? And then you decide, you're right, to tip the scale to see where it goes, and then you give the judgment. But in our case, judgment is first given, then accounting. Judgment is given by us on ourselves. In fact, we don't know, we don't understand that, and then the accounting comes after that. And the question is asked, why is it so? Why do we, God does really need us to say our own verdict? Why can't God do it on his own? So here's what the Rebbe explains, a beautiful explanation. This needs to be understood. Why is a person's own judgment needed, like in the case of King David? And he goes on and says, since each soul is a part of God himself, there is no way for angels, even the highest ones, to have control over a Jewish person. That is why until he or she gives a judgment, no one else could do that. Until we ourselves give a judgment on ourselves, no one can do that. From this we can derive two clear directives. On one hand, the severity of a sin, right? The severity of a sin that can lead a person to actually his own judgment. On the other hand, a person should never give up and fall into despair, as he or she always have control and is able to repent. In other words, as long as I haven't given myself the judgment is not ruled yet. And therefore, that means that even bad things that have happened, and even if it's beyond my control any longer, you could still say, nobody else could give that judgment. I have time to repent. I have time to return to the right way. So in fact, that gives us a little bit of a background to say about how powerful our prayer is. We could look at the negative side, right? With regards to judgment, nobody else can give judgment other than ourselves. And how much more so for good things, for positive things, nobody else is able to do more than what we could do for ourselves. So if we want to bring it to a question that could really be answered is, can we or can we not perform a miracle? Can each ordinary person, can every regular guy do something not regular? And we'll get that by looking a little bit more into the sources of what we see in the Tanakh, in the Bible. We know the month of Elul we're at, which we say it many times, is made out of that special time, the auspicious time where we have an opportunity to repent. And in the month of Elul, we focus on three terms. We focus on enhancing our Torah study, and we're focused on adding more to our prayers, and of course, what we spoke about 3 weeks ago, adding charity, adding more donations, and so on, because this is really important for us, for the giver, more than it is for the receiver. So let's look at the line of Torah, and if you don't mind, I'll take you a little bit to math on some calculations on how long the Jews were in Egypt. Now, I know that's not related necessarily to our weekly portion, but still, like we said, we always like to enhance the Torah study. And let's look at a few versions. How many years were the Jews in Egypt? We have 400, 430, 210, or 86. And I'll show you different sources from within the Torah that each one says completely different. It's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Okay, 400, 430, 210, or 86. Okay. Well, in our case, if there will be a fifth answer, which is all answers are right, are true. But let's look a little bit about the story. When did the enslavement of Egypt was conceived? It was actually told Abraham. Abraham, our forefather Abraham, this is way before, generations before that, was given a vision by God. If you remember the story, the covenant that Abraham did with God. Remember, Abraham was the first person to discover God and to teach people who God was, the creator of the whole world, and the God of heavens and earth, and so on and so forth. And Abraham, as the first Jew, basically, the Jewish nation did not exist yet, but as a forefather, was revealed. God had revealed to him what is going to happen. And he says like this, that's Genesis 15. And he said to Abraham, God said to Abraham, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, for they will enslave them and oppress them for 400 years. God is telling Abraham, you should know that the Jewish people will descend into Egypt. He does not tell him the reason for that. He does not tell them why it's supposed to happen, but he just says, this is it. Your descendants will be enslaved for 400 years in Egypt until the next verse says that they will leave Egypt. But on the other hand, let's look at Exodus and the habitation of the children of Israel that they dwelled in Egypt. It was 430 years. Where did 30 years come from? And let's look at another verse in Genesis. And he said, this is Jacob telling the brothers, the tribes, to go to Egypt, where Joseph was the king, and they did not know yet. And he said, behold, I have heard that there is grain being sold in Egypt. Go down there and buy us some from there, so that we will live and not die. Rashi said, what is go down? The Hebrew word is redu. Redu, it means to descend or to go down, but he did not say go, lechu. He alluded to the 210 years that they were enslaved in Egypt, according to the numerical value of redu. Reish is 200, 4 and 6, together 210. So we have one verse that Abraham is told by God 400 years. We have a summary, but just before leaving Egypt. This is in the book of Exodus. That's just not before. I'm sorry. That's it is before. Yeah, it's in chapter 12. They were leaving chapter 14. So just before leaving Egypt, they said, okay, we've been here 430 years. And Jacob, before they even go to Egypt, Jacob says, I know you're going to spend 210 years, me included, in Egypt. Another figure that appears is the figure of 86. And then in Genesis it says, and it shall be concerning the crops, that you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh, and the remaining 4 parts shall be yours, for seed for your fields, for your food, for those in your houses, and for the young children to eat. So this is from I forgot where it says. Agra Vilna. The Vilna Gaon says like this: 430. Okay, so 430 was since the decree was told to Abraham. This was from that day that Abraham made the covenant with God. 430 years forward is Exodus. Now 400 years, the figure 400, is since the birth of Isaac, because the prophecy started to materialize since Isaac. Because the first thing he says, you're going to have a child that will continue your tradition. Of course, Abraham was quite concerned. He was the first Jew. He was the first person to discover God. But then he said, I'm going to pass away. What will be after me? Who is going to take on that idea? Who is going to spread it in the world? And that's what God said. Don't worry, you're going to have a son, and this son of yours will be your follower, will be your successor, and will take everything you've built and enhance it and bring it forward. So 430 since the decree was told to Abraham, 400 in the birth of Isaac. 86, what's 86? That's 430 divided by 5. Right, Reuben? Divide by 5. Now I didn't bring another thing in Hebrew. We drink in Passover. You remember how many cups, Marty? Marty, how many cups we drink in Passover? You remember? Cups of wine? And they said, four cups, right? 4 cups of wine, right? The word, you're saying after the 3rd cup you can't remember every year. No year you can remember past the 3 cup. Marty doesn't remember any longer. Okay, so we drink 4 cups of wine. The word cup in Hebrew, kos, is 86. The numerical value of the word kos is 80. Chaf is 20. Vav 6 and Samech 60. So 26, 60, 86. 86 are the years. In fact, we only drink 4 cups. The 5th cup, we were supposed to be in Egypt 430 years. God had only He gave us an 80% discount. Right? In Taiwan, you say, when you say 20% discount, you say pay 80%. Right? That's what they say in Chinese. When you say, right, in America or in Israel, you say, buy this for 20% discount. And in Chinese, you would have the number 8, right? Pay only 80%. So God had given us 80% discount, which is quite of a discount. And we ended up staying in Egypt, going in enslavement. The enslavement was 86 years. We were in Egypt for 210 years. So 430 since the decree was told, 400 since the birth of Isaac. 210 is the right answer. We were there for 210, out of which 86 years were
Counting from the entrance of Yaakov or counting from the entrance of Yosef?
from the entrance of Yaakov. They were 210 years. And no, maybe you're right. Maybe we're counting from Yosef to get to 210. Yeah, let me reread it and I'll see. Um, so the 86 years were suffering. Now, don't get me wrong, 86 years of suffering is a whole lot of suffering, right? But that doesn't get near to 430 years of suffering. Why is it that 210 out of which 86 was suffering? And the Rebbe explains something very interesting. He says, first the Maharaj says, okay, so you're saying 430 years, but it's not true. They were not there for 430. So the Maharaj says, suffering begins as soon as a person hears about it, even if this is meant to happen in a while. For instance, a person who finds out from their doctor that they have to undergo a certain procedure, a certain operation, and then they set up a date, which is in 3 months from now, or in 6 months, or in 1 year from now. The person normally starts to worry already now, not 1 week or 2 days before the operation. Once you hear of something that is bound to happen, you actually start, although subconsciously, you start suffer, even if it hadn't happened. So Abraham hearing about it, that in 430 years, that in a later generation, the Jewish people will be enslaved. 430 years he's thinking about it. In fact, the suffering started from the very moment it was said, even though it was meant to happen on a much further date. So the Maharaj says that's why, because apparently we can't explain 430, 400, okay, we know where the date started, but God said that they will be in Egypt for 430 years. So in fact, we were in Egypt only 210 years, but the suffering of being in Egypt commenced much before that. As soon as God said that, as soon as it was introduced, that's when we already realized. So the Rebbe speaks about exchange, and he says like this: every detail in the enslavement in Egypt exists in a spiritual manner. In Torah study, this is why when a person toils in learning Torah, he is then exempted from physical enslavement. Only after the first period, when people started neglecting Torah study, the slavery actually began. So, in fact, if, and this is kind of hypothetical, but if the Jewish people, when going to Egypt, remember when they came to Egypt with Yaakov, with Jacob, when they came to Egypt, they started, they settled in the land of Goshen, and they started their own yeshiva system and Torah study system, right? The tribe of Levi was, Rashi Yeshiva was the head of yeshiva, and they were studying Torah, they were engaged in Torah studies, but slowly, it started to melt, to decay. It started, the connection to Torah was not as firm. And unfortunately, we know what was happening after that is when Pharaoh came, the new Pharaoh or the same Pharaoh who decided to stop, to give what's called the final solution to the Jewish problem, which is of course all the horrific things that he chose to do to our ancestors in Egypt. So the Rebbe says, in fact, we would have been exempted from the slavery had we put our effort in the Torah study. There's a story with the Chafetz Chaim. The Chafetz Chaim was a famous rabbi in Radin, and some rich guy who was involved in business also was involved. When he was successful in business, he wanted to pay tribute to God and to the community. He founded a charity, a fund, or what's it called, a trust fund or whatever, a fund of charity. He found that, being successful in his business, he decided to share his success with others, and he founded that fund. And what happened is that throughout the time, in fact, more and more people came to ask for money for his fund, for the charity that he founded. And he realized that he doesn't have enough money for his business, right? Instead of being occupied with his business, he's occupied with the fact people come to him to ask for money. So he went to the Chafetz Chaim, and he told him he wants to give up this fund. So the Chafetz Chaim quoted a verse from chapter 23 in Tehillim. King David says, "May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life." Now, the Hebrew word is not pursue. The Hebrew word is even more harsh than that. Chase me. May goodness and kindness chase me throughout my life. Chasing usually is given to someone who wants to harm you. They chase you or they go after you. Why goodness and kindness are not supposed to be described in the same word? He says to him, the Chafetz Chaim, in fact, a person has to have something that chases them throughout their lifetime. Life cannot be easy and comfortable as much as you want it to be. And that's why King David says, if something is chasing me, I want it to be goodness and kindness. And he concluded telling this rich guy, he says, you better be chased by receivers than by givers. In other words, it's better say thank God that who's chasing you are people who want to take money from you, that you can help them, and you're not actually chased by people who are giving you, which means you are on the receiving side. If you are, as long as you are on the giving end, you should be thankful to God, right? May you always be on the giving side and not on the receiving side. So people are asking you to help them, to support them, then you should be thankful for that instead of you having to chase people, right? That in order to get their support from. And this is the first advice we have for someone who wants to really change their destiny and to perform what we call it as a miracle. We could say, it is a heavenly intervention in the world. A person who wants to get that, he has to take something upon himself or herself in Torah study, studying more Torah, understanding more Torah. And in fact, if you work hard and you know better than others, you're a little slightly older than me and even than Reuben, and you know that when you work hard on things in life, they become much more valuable to you. So a person who wants to study Torah and understand this is difficult, and then we could tell him, our forefathers, if they would put their difficulties in Torah, they wouldn't have to be working as slaves for Pharaoh. So we could actually exchange that difficulty we have from learning with exchange, God will exchange it to us with other difficulties that we might encounter. The second thing that we enhance in the month of Elul, in the month of this last month, is prayer. And this is when, Reuben, we were referring to the prayer of Hannah, right? The prayer of Hannah, just to give you the story, a little bit of history. Hannah was the wife of Elkanah, who was a righteous person. She was married to him for 10 years, and unfortunately, they did not have any children. 10 years later, she decided that, maybe the problem is with me. Maybe I am not capable, physically, spiritually, whatever you want to call it. And she decided to bring another woman into the house. And she said, perhaps this will bring luck to me, just like Sarah did, right? Remember, Sarah did that, bringing Hagar. And Rachel also. Rachel brought the maidservant, and then later she conceived. And she brought a woman named Pnina. That was the name of the other woman. And we fast forward, the prophet, this is in Samuel 1, in first chapter. We fast forward 9.5 years. 9.5 years fast forward. Pnina has 10 children now, while Hannah does not even have one. And she realized that in fact there's a problem with her, right? One child, two children, three children. Obviously everything is functioning with her husband, but the problem lies on her shoulder. Her tzara, her other woman, the other woman, her friend, her companion, has 10 children now, and she does not have yet a child. And after, all that time, right? We're talking 10 years, another 10 years, almost 20 years of time of marriage. And she decides to go to the temple and do something that was not done prior to that. She says a prayer, and within the prayer, she already designates her son to be something. And that's something that normally is not done. And soon we'll see different issues that are not issues, but different concepts we could learn from this prayer. The prayer of Hannah, let's look at what the Talmud says about it. Rav Amnuna said, how many significant halachot can be derived from these verses? The prayer of Hannah, as it says, and Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved and her voice could not be heard. So Eli thought her to be drunk. The Gemara elaborates from that which is stated here, and Hannah spoke in her heart, the halakha, that one who prays must focus his heart on his prayer is derived. That's one halakha. And from that which is stated here, only her lips moved, the halakha is that one who prays must, what is it? Enunciate the words with his lips, not only contemplate them in his heart, is derived. That's another halakha. From that which is written here, and her voice could not be heard, the halakha is that one forbidden to raise his voice in his Amidah prayer, as it must be recited silently. What we do today when we say the Amidah prayer is individual. Each one recites it silently. So from this apparently simple prayer, we could learn all these halachot. And the question is, what's so different? What makes Hannah's prayer or Hannah's prayer so special? The second question, there are many other prayers described in the Torah. And the third thing, you would say, okay, she prayed from her broken heart because she wanted to have kids. We know of two other people that did not have kids initially. There was Isaac and Rebekah. They both prayed for God to have children. Why don't we take their prayer as a role model for prayers and to get things done? Rather, what happens in the prayer of Hannah is as follows. You see, when we pray to God to have children, there are things that are predetermined. The Talmud says that when a drop of semen is meeting an egg, and they're supposed to be, connecting to form an embryo, to form a baby, first one cell, then two cells, four eggs, so on. That drop of semen with the egg is brought in the angel. And the angel says, this person will be rich or poor, tall or short, he will be smart or not so smart. But there's one thing that is not determined, or whether this person will be righteous or wicked. Or in other words, whether this person will do what they need to do spiritually or choose not to do. And the element here is choose not to do, because there is free choice and free will. Hannah, for that matter, goes out to daven to pray for God and sets in her prayer how her son is going to be. And that's a precedent that was never done before. You see, she's begging, she's telling God that she wants to have a child, but she wants her child to be righteous, so much so, as we'll see in a minute, as righteous as Moses and Aaron. Okay? And that's something that's unprecedented. Because saying a prayer, and I'll give you an example of a few people. Chizkiyahu the king, Chizkiyahu the king in the time of Yeshaya, a Navi, was the prophet told him, Yeshaya told him that he's actually going to die because he did not bring children. He does not in a proactive way, does not bring children, does not have children. And Chizkiyahu answers the prophet and says, you know why I don't have children? Because I saw in a prophecy of my own that the children I have are going to be very wicked. So if I know my children are going to be very wicked, why would I have children? I know that my children. And Yeshayahu says that's not a reason, because free choice is given. Chizkiyahu, as response to that, stands by the wall and starts praying, and his prayer is answered. He lives for 15 more years, and he actually has two children that are born in quite a late age, that he was, an advanced age. The two children were Menashe and Rav Sheka, and when they were little, you could already see they were really bad. They were nasty kids, but more nasty. All kids are kind of nasty, but they were. He actually, the Bach brings it. He actually held his two. There were two kids. He put them on his shoulders, and he walked with them to the Holy Temple. And while he was walking to them, they were kidding with each other. They were, laughing with each other of how they are going to worship and sacrifice in the temple to idols and to other pagan entities. They were the other kids. The two kids were talking about how they're going to desecrate the temple and how they're going to put an idol in the temple, and instead of praying to God, pray to the idol and basically worship idols within the holy temple. This is a father, his two kids are on his shoulders, and they're quite in an age that they could communicate, and they're talking to each other what they're going to do in the temple when they grow older. That's not normal for little kids. They normally like the experience of things, but here they are. He's shocked, and he trips, and he falls, and the two children fall. One dies on the spot. That was Rav Shekeh dies on the spot. Menashe, the other child, survives this accident, and as we all know, grows up to be quite of a negative individual, and in fact, everything that he was kidding with his brother that he would do, he actually did. So we see, in fact, that was quite interesting. Anyway, Chizkiah prays to have children. God answers his prayers. That does not change. The children have free choice. they are choosing to be wicked. And there's a question. God has performed a miracle. You have an older person who has kids now. God had made a miracle. Why not? You're doing a miracle, make it all the way. But indeed, we'll see soon the quote, everything is in the hands of heaven besides the fear of heaven. Right? Everything is predetermined by God. Our free choice is not. That's why it's called free choice, free will we have. And let's look what the Rebbe explains about the unprecedented prayer of Hannah. This needs to be understood. Prayer is mentioned in the Torah numerous times, and yet the source of all prayer-related laws is solely from Hannah's prayer. Rather, the prayer of Hannah, and you will grant your servant an offspring of men. And our sages explain an offspring who would be the equivalent of two of the world's greatest men. Who were they? Moses and Aaron. As it stated, Moses and Aaron among his priests, and Samuel among those who call his name. Meaning, Hannah did not only ask for a child, but a righteous and pious child. And indeed, this is what had happened. This is in complete contradiction with the rules set by God, that everything is in the hands of heaven except for the fear of heaven. This is a predetermined rule. Everything is discussed, everything is determined by above, and the only thing that is not determined is the person's own behavior. They are complete to choose. They have the free will to choose what to do and what not to do. And in case of Hannah, what is so unique about this prayer? That her prayer was answered in the most astonishing way, that she actually merited to have a child, and that child followed exactly what she asked for. So this is another key. We were talking about performing a miracle, ordinary people. Yes, in fact, through prayer, through intensive prayer, we could actually change things that are not meant to change, are not bound to change. And the third thing we want to discuss is the attribute of charity. And when we say charity, it doesn't have to be necessarily giving money to the poor. We've explained that many times. That is, even if from this podium, we explained many times that charity does not only reflect with the money you give and the amount of money, but it also could be time, attention, a smile, a good word, a cheer up, and so on and so forth. All these things. So here, there's another thing I wanted to touch upon. It is the Ramban asks a question based on what the Talmud says. Here's what the Talmud says in Kiddushin. Quite interesting, a very interesting outlook. It says like this: anyone whose merits are greater than his sins is punished with suffering. Again, anyone whose merits are greater than his sins is punished with suffering. It's not a mistake. It's not a typo. In order to cleanse his sins in this world and enable him to merit full reward for his mitzvot in the world to come. Okay, this is one quote that people ask why. The exact right. It's it's an often common question. Why do bad things happen to good people? This is a braita. In fact, I didn't quote the whole thing. It's a braita from, and he says this: if somebody is righteous, if somebody is doing the right thing, he's actually eating a lot of in this world. Okay, right? In order to cleanse his sins in the world and enable in this world and enable to merit full reward for his mitzvahs in the world to come. And due to the punishment, he appears to observe like one who burnt the entire Torah without leaving even one letter remaining of it. This is quite of an explanation. The words that are not stressed are explanations. So it says, the Bible says, anyone whose merits are greater than his sins, it is like he burns the whole Torah without leaving a letter remaining to it. Conversely, anyone whose sins are greater than his merits has goodness bestowed upon him in this world, and he appears like one who has fulfilled the entire Torah without lacking the fulfillment of even one letter of it. And of course, the same explanation follows, which is a person who did little things that are meaningful in this world. Most of their days, most of their actions were negative. Then they get rewarded in this world in order to be taken to retribution in the world to come. The Ramban, in his sermons, there's the sermon of Rambam of Rosh Hashanah brings that Mishnah and says, if that's so, we always say on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, please, the righteous people are signed for life, and the not righteous people or the wicked people are for the opposite. He says, why did Rabbi Yochanan teach that righteous people are sealed for life? According to the Talmud, it looks like the other way around. In other words, if someone is rewarded in this world, right? We want to have we want to have reward, we want to have money, we want to have success, we want to have health and happiness and so on. According to what the Talmud says, this is only the wicked people. The righteous people are getting bashed and bashed and bashed, and we get all the negative things. How could that be? So one of the explanations is that in fact there's a distinction between two types of mitzvot, of commandments. We have the commandments that are between us and God, and there's the commandments between us and our fellows, right? The social commandments. And in fact, we are talking about the days of judgment of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are the days where we are judged on these commandments that are between us and our fellow people, right? And our social mitzvot. Because the spiritual mitzvah gets spiritual reward, but physical mitzvah, when we do things that are helping each other in this world, we can actually get benefit for this world. And this is what Maimonides, that's how he answers this question in his preface for the Mishnayot, right? In Peresh Be'ah, he says like this: when a person fulfills the commandments relating to his relationship with God, God Almighty rewards him or her in the world to come. When he fulfill, however, social commandments, benefit would be also in this world. Others will reciprocate, and kindness will be multiplied. Besides the reward of these commandments, of course, Maimonides says a very simple explanation. He says, we help each other. We're talking about two sets of relationship. We have a relationship with God, and we have a relationship with our fellow people. Relationship with God is a different thing. God takes care of that, and He has His ways of doing things. But let me talk about, he says, let's focus on the social commandments, the commandments we have between us and ourselves, our own people and other people as well. And he said, if we do that, benefit will come in this world. Others will reciprocate. That's the nature, the natural thing, the natural response when somebody smiles to you is to smile back. The natural response when you are a beneficiary of something good is to benefit others. That's the normal way. That's our nature. That's a part of who we are. Granted, some people are doing a very good job not to do that, right? They're forcing themselves to respond negatively to positive gestures. But we're not talking about these people. We're not talking about those situations, normally speaking. So, in fact, the idea is that suffering has no room in this world because we are able to change suffering when we propose of ourselves, when we make things, when we give good positive gestures, we annihilate suffering because we take control. So that's another aspect about it, and that's what Rabbi Ayat says in Hayom Yom. Rabbi Isaac Homeler related, when I came to Liozna, I met elder Hasidim who had been Hasidim of the Magid and Menachem Mendel of Havodok. They used to say, and here's the quote: have affection to a fellow Jew, and God will have affection for you. Do a kindness for a fellow Jew, and God will do a kindness for you. Befriend a fellow Jew, and God will befriend you. In other words, what we do have a very simple outcome. The implications, the consequences are tangible when we act in a certain way that is, and this is where charity gets in, because it doesn't necessarily, like we said, it's not only monetary support, it's kindness, it's affection, it's friendship. All these matters are actually manifesting in this world, and that helps us to really live in a way that's better than we were without it. So just to summarize, these three matters, these three concepts: learning Torah with dedication and with hardships, exempt us, absolves us from other hardships. Our prayers are able to change our destiny, even when matters that are not given to change. And when we do charity, meaning when we multiply our social commandments, our social mitzvot, we could actually have the whole world act in a way that is much better than it is, and therefore we can actually change the destiny. So just to answer the question, the leading question, can we perform miracles? The answer is yes, we can. And we can use all these tools to really perform miracles. And I could promise you, you rest assured, there's someone who takes that into immediate attention and acts in that direction could really see results. And even if in cases where godly intervention is required, that godly intervention will follow for someone who does more, goes the extra mile and does beyond that is necessary from them. Okay, any questions? No questions, Marty? Okay, no questions, no questions. You're saying there's time to